The crumpled receipt sat on the kitchen counter, like a silent confession. Chad's eyes lingered on it for a moment too long before he picked it up. "Luck's in," it read, along with yesterday's date and a charge for 2 glasses of champagne. His heart thudded in his chest as he glanced toward the stairs, listening to Kathy's laughter trickling down from their bedroom. She was on the phone, her tone warm, playful, too warm for a simple conversation with a friend. Chad had been ignoring the signs for months, but the receipt was the final crack in the facade. He folded it carefully, slipped it into his pocket, and walked to the garage. He needed air, space to think, but most of all, he needed a plan. It wasn't the first time Kathy had been distant. Lately, she had excuses for everything. Late nights at work, canceled dinner plans, sudden gym sessions she never mentioned before. But Chad dismissed it as the stress of life, of routine, of the 10 years they'd shared together. Until last night. She had kissed him goodbye as she left for her supposed girls' night, her lips brushing his cheek like a ghost of the love they once had. Chad had stared at her retreating figure, the weight of suspicion heavy in his gut. Now, the receipt made it all too real. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was his best friend, Alex. "You free tonight?" the text read. Chad replied with shaking hands, "Not tonight, man. Got something to handle." He put the phone down and leaned against his workbench, staring at the neat rows of tools hanging on the wall. Kathy had helped him organize the space when they first moved in. Back then, she was his partner in everything. Now, she was a stranger. By the time Kathy came downstairs, Chad was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen. "Hey," she said, her tone casual. Too casual. She had changed into an oversized hoodie, her hair slightly damp, as if she'd just showered. "You okay? You look tired." Chad forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking." "About what?" she asked, leaning against the doorway. He hesitated. For a moment, he considered confronting her, asking her outright about the receipt. But no, that wasn't the right move, not yet. Instead, he stood and kissed her forehead. "Nothing important," he said softly. As she turned to leave, his eyes lingered on her phone. It was face down on the counter, her lock screen lighting up briefly with a notification. A name flashed across the screen. Tyrone. Chad's blood ran cold. He clenched his fists, his mind racing. Tyrone. The name was unfamiliar, but it held all the weight of betrayal. Kathy didn't notice his change in demeanor as she poured herself a glass of wine and disappeared upstairs again. Alone in the living room, Chad pulled out his own phone and opened a search engine. He typed the name slowly, deliberately, and hit enter. His suspicions were about to get confirmed, and this time, there would be no turning back. The plan forming in his mind wasn't just about justice. It was about survival. Chad sat in the dim glow of his office lamp, staring at the screen in front of him. The search results confirmed everything he needed to know. Tyrone wasn't just some passing fling. His social media page told a story Chad didn't want to read. Expensive dinners, lavish gifts, and photos tagged just far enough from home to avoid suspicion. Kathy had been living a double life, and she'd been good at hiding it. Chad leaned back in his chair, a humorless laugh escaping his lips. "How long has this been going on?" he muttered to himself. "A year? Longer?" Memories began flooding back, now tinted with the bitterness of betrayal. Kathy's sudden work trips, her newfound interest in lingerie she never wore for him, and the faint whiff of cologne on her clothes that wasn't his. He clenched his fists, the anger bubbling up. But just as quickly, he forced himself to calm down. Anger won't fix this, he thought. Revenge wasn't just about striking back, it was about precision. The next morning, Kathy was her usual cheerful self, humming as she poured coffee. Chad watched her from across the table, studying her movements like a predator observing prey. She chatted casually about her plans for the day, mentioning errands and a meeting with her colleagues. "Anything exciting planned for you today?" she asked, her tone light. Chad forced a smile. "Just the usual. Meetings, reports, the grind never stops." She laughed, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his calm exterior. As she left the house, Chad waited by the window, watching her car disappear down the street. He exhaled sharply, pulling out his phone. It was time to make some calls. Later that day, Chad found himself sitting across from Alex in a small corner booth at their favorite diner. Alex listened intently as Chad laid everything out: the affair, the receipts, and Tyrone. "You've known for how long?" Alex asked, incredulous. "Almost 6 months," Chad admitted. "I didn't want to believe it. Thought maybe it was a phase, a rough patch. But now I know better." Alex shook his head. "And you didn't say anything? Didn't confront her?" "What would be the point?" Chad replied bitterly. "She'd deny it, twist it, make me the bad guy. No, I need to play this smart. I'm not just going to confront her. I'm going to take back control." Alex nodded slowly. "So, what's the plan?" Chad smirked, the first real emotion he'd shown all day. "I've started moving things around. Closed our joint accounts, canceled the credit cards, and moved her name off the utilities. By the time she realizes what's happening, she'll have nothing left to stand on." That evening, as Chad sat alone in the house they had built together, he felt a strange mix of emotions. There was anger, sure, but beneath it was something deeper: sadness for the man he used to be, the love he once believed in. Kathy had taken that from him. Now he was going to take everything from her. The first piece of the puzzle was in place. But this was only the beginning. The next morning, Chad woke up earlier than usual. The house felt colder, emptier, as if Kathy's betrayal had sucked the warmth out of it. But he didn't let it distract him. Today wasn't for grieving, it was for action. By 9 a.m., Chad was at the bank, speaking with a teller about closing their joint accounts. He listened patiently as the woman explained the process, nodding along as she asked, "Do you want a cashier's check for the balance or a transfer?" "Cashier's check," Chad replied. He didn't want anything traced, not yet. Next, he visited the safe deposit box they shared. Inside were the mementos of their life together: marriage certificates, deeds, and Kathy's collection of gold jewelry. He picked up the items one by one, feeling the weight of each piece before deciding which ones were his to keep. "Divide and conquer," he muttered under his breath, closing the box with a satisfying click. Back at the house, Chad prepared for the next phase of his plan. He retrieved a notebook from his office, flipping to a blank page. At the top, he wrote 3 words: Contingency Plan Alpha. Step 1. Secure the house. He called a locksmith and arranged for the locks to be changed the following afternoon. The garage code would stay the same for now, just to give Kathy enough rope to hang herself. Step 2. Legal advantage. Chad picked up his phone and dialed Alex again. "I want to file for divorce," he said without hesitation. Finally, Alex replied, the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "What's the timeline?" "Fast. I want the papers ready to serve by the end of the week." Alex paused. "Are you sure about this, Chad? Once it's filed, there's no going back." "I've never been more sure of anything," Chad said, his voice steel. As the hours passed, Chad began to feel the weight of what he was doing. This wasn't just revenge. It was the end of an era, the dismantling of a life they'd built together. He walked through the house, taking inventory of everything they owned. The leather couch he had picked out, the dining table they had argued over, the bookshelf Kathy had insisted on. It was all about to become a battlefield in the war she had started. When Kathy came home that evening, Chad greeted her as if nothing had changed. He poured her a glass of wine, listening as she droned on about her day. But this time, he wasn't really listening. He was calculating. Every word she said, every lie she told, was ammunition for his plan. Before bed, Chad slipped into the guest room, the first visible sign that their marriage was over. Kathy noticed, but didn't say a word. As Chad lay there staring at the ceiling, he whispered to himself, "This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." Thursday morning arrived with a chill in the air. Chad stood by the window, sipping his coffee as Kathy prepared for work. Her routine had become predictable: a quick shower, light makeup, and a dash of perfume. Too much for a simple office day. As she leaned over to kiss him goodbye, Chad tilted his head slightly, letting her lips brush his cheek. "Have a good day," she said with a smile, grabbing her bag and heading out the door. "You too," Chad replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, Chad picked up his phone. Alex, is it ready? Papers are signed and sealed, Alex replied. I've got someone heading to her office now. She'll be served within the hour. Chad smirked. Perfect. Let's see how she handles this. By 10:15 a.m., Chad's phone buzzed. It was Alex again. It's done. Word is, she looked like a deer in headlights when she saw the papers. I'd say she wasn't expecting it. Chad laughed quietly, the sound bitter. Good. Let's keep her on her toes. At lunch, Chad's phone buzzed again. This time it was Kathy. He let it ring, watching her name flash on the screen before sending it to voicemail. When she called again, he answered, his tone cold. Chad, what the hell is this? She demanded, her voice laced with panic. It's exactly what it looks like, Kathy, he replied evenly. You want it out. I'm just helping you along. You didn't have to do it like this, she snapped. Serving me at work? Humiliating me in front of my colleagues. Chad chuckled. You mean like how you humiliated me for over a year, sneaking around with Tyrone? There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Kathy finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost pleading. Chad, we need to talk about this. Can we meet tonight? Sure, Chad said, his tone devoid of emotion. Let's talk. But don't expect me to change my mind. That evening, Kathy returned home to find Chad sitting at the kitchen table, the divorce papers spread out in front of him. You didn't have to take it this far, she said as she sat down, her voice trembling. You left me no choice, Kathy, Chad replied. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and I'm done pretending everything's fine. It wasn't like that, she stammered, her eyes darting around the room. I never meant to hurt you. Chad's jaw tightened. Don't insult me, Kathy. I know about Tyrone. I've known for months. Her face crumbled, and for a moment, she looked genuinely remorseful. But Chad didn't let his guard down. This isn't just about revenge, he continued. It's about freedom, my freedom. You wanted a way out? Well, here it is. Pack your things and leave. Kathy's tears started to fall, but Chad didn't flinch. This was his moment to reclaim control, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. By Friday morning, Kathy's car was parked in the driveway, unmoved since the night before. Chad wasn't surprised. He knew she would try to hold her ground, refusing to leave the house. But he had planned for this. The locks were changed, the finances were secured, and now it was a waiting game. As Kathy shuffled around the kitchen, her eyes red and swollen, Chad observed her with quiet indifference. Every gesture she made, every sigh, only fueled his resolve. You're really doing this, aren't you? She finally asked, breaking the silence. I didn't choose this, Kathy, Chad replied, his voice cold. You did. You made your bed. Now you can lie in it. With Tyrone. Her face twisted with anger. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, he interrupted, standing up from the table. You threw away 10 years of marriage for a man who probably doesn't even love you. And now you expect me to roll over and make it easy for you? Not a chance. Kathy stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Chad waited a moment, then followed her movements on the newly installed security cameras. She stood in the driveway, pacing and muttering to herself before pulling out her phone. He couldn't hear her conversation, but he had a good idea who she was calling. By noon, Chad received a call from Alex. You won't believe this, Alex said, a mix of amusement and disbelief in his voice. She's already filed a motion to contest the divorce terms. Claims you're trying to push her out unfairly. Chad laughed bitterly. Of course she did. Let her try. I've got everything documented, proof of her affair, financial records, you name it. She's got no ground to stand on. And the restraining orders? Alex asked. File it, Chad said firmly. Let's make sure she can't drag this out any longer than necessary. That evening, Chad returned home to find the house eerily quiet. He walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed the mess, broken plates scattered on the floor, a shattered wine glass near the sink. But it was the living room that truly caught his attention. His clothes were piled in a heap on the floor, soaked in something foul-smelling. The sight made his blood boil, but He forced himself to stay calm. Kathy had gone too far, and now he had everything he needed to bury her case. Chad retrieved the footage from the security cameras, watching as Kathy trashed the house in a fit of rage. She had even scrawled obscenities on the walls in lipstick. He forwarded the video to Alex with a simple note, proof. The next morning, Kathy was served with a restraining order at her workplace. Her reaction made the local gossip rounds. She screamed, cursed, and even tried to shove the officer delivering the papers. Chad's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from mutual friends, most of them in disbelief. Chad smiled grimly. The fallout wasn't just beginning, it was in full swing. The weekend after Kathy was served, Chad sat on his back porch, sipping his coffee as the autumn leaves swirled in the wind. The house, once filled with tension and deceit, now felt lighter, emptier, but lighter. The echoes of Kathy's rage had faded, replaced by a quiet resolve. His phone buzzed on the table. It was a message from Alex. Restraining order is officially in place. She can't come near the house. Divorce hearing set for next month. Chad exhaled, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was finally in control of his life. Monday morning, Chad returned to work with a renewed sense of purpose. Maria, his executive assistant, greeted him with a knowing smile. "You look different," she said, handing him a stack of reports. "Different how?" Chad asked, raising an eyebrow. "Lighter. Like you've dropped 100 pounds of stress," she replied. Chad chuckled softly. "Maybe I have." Maria lingered for a moment, her expression shifting to something more serious. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling this better than most people would." "Thanks, Maria," Chad said, meeting her gaze. "But it's not over yet." She nodded, her smile returning. "Well, when it is, maybe you can finally take that vacation you've been talking about." By the following week, the divorce proceedings were underway. Kathy's attempts to drag things out were thwarted at every turn, thanks to Chad's meticulous planning and Alex's expertise. The judge, stern but fair, wasn't impressed by Kathy's antics, especially after viewing the security footage of her rampage. In the end, the divorce was finalized in 6 months. The settlement was straightforward. The house stayed with Chad, along with most of their shared assets. Kathy walked away with far less than she had hoped for, her lover nowhere to be found. As Chad signed the final papers, a strange sense of closure washed over him. It wasn't joy or satisfaction, it was peace. The storm was over, and he had weathered it. Months later, Chad found himself sitting in a quiet bar, nursing a glass of bourbon. He was alone, but not lonely. His life was finally his own, free from the lies and betrayal that had once consumed him. "Can I buy you a drink?" a familiar voice asked. Chad turned to see Maria standing there, her smile warm and genuine. "I think I owe you one," Chad replied, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. Maria sat down, her eyes sparkling with unspoken possibilities. As they clinked glasses, Chad realized something. Life wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was about moving forward, finding happiness, and learning to trust again. That night, Chad walked out of the bar with Maria by his side. The past was behind him, and for the first time in years, the future looked bright. "Ready for a new chapter?" Maria asked, glancing up at him. "More than ready," Chad replied, his voice steady and sure. And with that, he stepped into the next phase of his life, leaving the wreckage of his marriage far behind.